This is a preview of the newly revised residential purchase agreement that's coming out December 16th, 2024, so about a week from now. And not much has changed except one major difference, which is that this form now eliminates the SPBB, the seller's payment of buyer's broker. That form is going away. And I'll show you where. Now, you'll see the revisions marked in red. And when the official form comes out, I'll do a full tutorial. But for now, I'll just go through and point out the red areas that are being revised. And of course, you'll see it here, the 12, because this is coming out in December since the last revision, which was in July. And that the increased deposit is now being taken off this form. And of course, it was rarely used, but now any increased deposit will be reflected on a C.A.R form IDA, increased deposit addendum. Okay, not a big deal. This is a big deal. And all this red here has to do with the seller's payment of buyer's broker. Now, the SPBB form, which was total overkill, totally unnecessary, is being eliminated in a shocking, uncharacteristic move. C.A.R's actually consolidating and simplifying by eliminating that SPBB form and instead just having that taken care of on the purchase agreement. So I commend them for taking one small step in the right direction of consolidating and simplifying. So let's take a look here. So this is foreclosing costs. It used to have a checkbox for other, and they've simplified this line here, which is good because you have to distinguish between when the seller is giving the buyer a credit for non-commission related closing costs. I mean, technically you don't have to, but they had parsed it out so much before that they're cleaning it up. So this is better here, this line G1. Okay, now additional seller credit, and it says does not include buyer broker compensation. So what are we talking about here? I guess this is in addition to that. All right, so this is the important part though. Seller payment for buyer's obligation to compensate buyer's broker. This section is what eliminates the SPBB form. You'll check this box. It's very important that you'll check that box if you're going to do this. And it says the seller agrees to pay a percentage of the final purchase price and then an additional flat dollar amount if applicable, or instead of this percentage, you can just put a flat dollar amount toward the obligation of the buyer to compensate buyer's broker. Okay. And then it says buyer affirmatively represents that at the time this is made, the buyer does have a BRBC, a buyer representation agreement that pertains to this specific property. It's valid, and that the compensation can't be less than what is being asked for. So buyer's agents can't go out there and have a 1% BRBC done and then ask for 2 or 3% up here. You can't do that, which was stated in a more long-winded manner on the SPBB. But now that form, the SPBB, is gone, thankfully, and this is just done here. And then there's some corresponding text later on that I'll scroll down and show you. Now, just for a frame of reference, let me show you how different this looks from the last one. So remember here, before we had this SPBB, where you have to check this box to incorporate it, or you could write it in here, but most agents would check this box. And you know what? As a broker, I saw so many transactions done where agents wouldn't even check this box, but they would just include the SPBB with their offer. Sloppy, but that's just the real world application of how agents do forms. So it's good that they're addressing it all here in the RPA. Now we scroll down here, there's a little verbiage about tenant occupied property. Okay. We keep going on, and ultimately we need to go to that spot that pertains. This is just about the fire hardening. They're just cleaning up little text here and there. Not a big deal. All this is largely inconsequential, except this is the corresponding text with where the SPBB was eliminated. But here's the interesting thing. So this just basically expands on the same thing up top, that there needs to be a BRBC in place, a representation agreement. It doesn't have to be the C.A.R form BRBC. It just needs to be a legally valid. And I say legally because in California, the law kicks in January 1st that every licensee, regardless of being a realtor or not, must have a representation agreement. And it says that if the amount on the representation agreement is less, or it's not valid or doesn't cover the property, then the seller has no obligation to pay the buyer's broker. I can't really highlight this thing. It's a mess. So the seller has no obligation to pay the buyer's broker. Just remember that. That's a loophole that a seller could use to not pay a commission and mess this whole thing up. And then most of this verbiage just pertains to just the parties being aware of what the implications are, because everything's so litigious now after this whole original lawsuit. I mean, there's so many other lawsuits going on, but regarding commission and agents, and if agents are overcharging, and I mean, so compensation disclosure, of course, we need advisory verbiage. Okay, not a big deal. We don't really care, because this is just all. I mean, all this is the stuff that this is just the disclaimer sort of verbiage anyway, right? So largely inconsequential. Now, but this is probably the second most important part after the elimination of the SPBB. And down here just cleans up about identifying entity buyers, the name of the entity, meaning an LLC, corporation, or trust, and that in the case of it being an entity, who the individual is. And like I've said on other videos, sometimes I see someone sign the name of the entity, ABC Homes Inc., and it's written in cursive. And this is part of this is a glitch in DocuSign, where DocuSign's not being managed properly. But either way, that signature is invalid, or potentially invalid, simply because there's no individually authorized signature on it. There needs to be a name, a John or Jane Doe signing as the authorized signer, an officer in the corporation, or the trustee of the trust. It needs to be a person that can be identified that could speak as an authorized signer on behalf. So that just kind of cleans this area up. And this goes on, same idea. That's it. And I will do a full tutorial once this form is released in about a week. But keep in mind that the big takeaway is SPBB is gone, and it's all addressed right here on the top of page 2 of 17 of the RPA. Thanks for watching.